Did you ever think you'd witness a title reign in WWE that got to all the crazy numbers you only heard as statistics? How about that history being made by one of the most vilified wrestlers of all time? For 1,316 days, Roman Reigns ran the show in WWE as world champion. In that nearly 4-year stretch, the company revolved around the stories that he was telling, whether interpersonal, redemption, or something as simple as wanting to wipe the floor with the best of the best. From 2020 to 2024, he walked into 4 WrestleManias with the same reign and added 5 main events into his resume with what is unquestionably the most dominant title reign we'll see in our lifetime. The question now is, what were the highlights, what were the lowlights, and when did this run hit its peak? Think back to where you were in your life near the end of summer 2020, give or take half a decade ago, a year in which the world was in the middle of a global pandemic, you couldn't find a PS5 in stores, no one would stop talking about The Last Dance and the Tiger King. Meanwhile, WWE may as well have stood for world weird entertainment. Seemingly anything and everything that was pitched in a creative meeting was getting the green light. You want to extract an eyeball? Go for it. 30-year-old man and a teenager? Sure. Karaoke battle? Yeah, knock yourself out. Then you had the pay-per-views, each given some sort of over-the-top marketing lingo. The horror show at Extreme Rules, the greatest wrestling match ever at Backlash, and come SummerSlam, you'll never see it coming. And well, in more ways than one, you didn't see it coming. Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman were awarded the main event spot with the Universal title up for grabs in a Falls Count Anywhere match. And please, do not forget this championship was in the gutter and then some, marred by controversial booking decisions, part-time champions, injuries, and storylines that brought the momentum of nearly every wrestler who held it to a screeching halt. Once The Fiend put an end to the match, he was blindsided by a returning Roman Reigns who had been away for 4 months at this point. He stepped aside to take some time away for his personal health and family and considered himself retired from WWE. It bears repeating, remember who this was. No revisionism. This right here was the character that got the most hated push of the 2010s. The golden goose of WWE management. A wrestler selected by the brass and jammed down the audience's throat harder than a Zdeno Chara slapshot. Backlash? That didn't matter. Constant refusal of the direction of the character? Yeah, you guys are the idiots for thinking that it's not working. Fans begging and pleading for him to turn heel? You could have started a riot and they wouldn't listen. In the back of our minds, there was always the possibility. What if? What if just once they let him do what his cousin The Rock did years and years ago and become a mega heel? Something far more authentic than yet another rehash of the smiley superhero character that we'd seen so many times already. What if? What if he just has one run? Where could that possibly lead him? As it turns out, the "You'll never see it coming" tagline made a lot more sense than we knew. Reigns came back, and the prevailing thought upon first glance was, here we go again. He's right back to his main event status, doing the same thing in the same gear, here to say the exact same catchphrases. You'd gotten so used to the pushback and constant reluctancy to turn him, even though his mannerisms were different and he was acting like a bad guy, you couldn't just assume with this company. Maybe it was just a one-off to reassert his dominance. As we now know, this was the night that everything changed. Then came the following SmackDown, just days before the next pay-per-view Payback, this one to be main evented by a triple threat for the Universal title. But before that, Adam Pearce had to get everyone to sign on the dotted line. Everyone did except for Reigns, who wanted changes made to the contract. A contract that he was going to run through his new special counsel, Paul Heyman. And this right here was the beginning of a new chapter, signaling that yes, he's a heel now, but with Paul Heyman, we're gonna raise the stakes just a little bit more. In the main event of Payback, Reigns didn't enter the match until Strowman and Wyatt ripped each other apart, signed the contract at the top of the ramp with steel chair in hand. There's a beauty to him holding that weapon, as that's what led to his demise later on. Came in, picked the bones, and within a matter of minutes was the new champion. Most of you know how wrestling works, you know how the formula is. You beat someone for their title, they want it back, that's usually your first program a lot of the time. That surprisingly didn't happen here. One of the most pressing questions was, what was this new character about? Paul Heyman laid the groundwork, saying that the pillars were family, tradition, and legacy. All three of these showcased in the years that followed. Also, This was no longer the big dog. This was now the tribal chief. It's funny how things work out because a day before SummerSlam, the Thunderdome was revealed, and when I think back to some of the promos cut in this era, it was the perfect canvas for this domineering villain to paint new stories. You couldn't have a mixed reception. They could control how the crowd responded, and the silence just added to the weight of how relaxed and comfortable Roman felt. Later on in this reign, it became the same repetitive, structured, empty-calorie promo. Acknowledge me, you ain't gonna beat me, I'm the greatest of all time. But here, that wasn't the case at all. When you have a new character like this, it's so important to hit the ground running. Firmly establish who they are. When he met his cousin Jey Uso, that's exactly what happened. He won a fatal 4-way match to become #1 contender. At the time watching this, my thinking was there's an easy story to tell. The history is right in front of us, but it'll probably be another rehash of the can they coexist type beat. For a long time, this company was guilty of wishy-washy storytelling. They'd do one thing one week, and then 2 weeks later, it would be like it never happened, and you were the one who was dumb for expecting a payoff for watching the product. Right now, when you look at the bigger stars in the company, their strengths and weaknesses are up for your interpretation. You can make out their motivations yourself. It's a choose your own adventure with things that happened months ago really mattering. Those deep characters started right here when Reigns became the gaslighter of all gaslighters. He told Jey that there was no way he could win the title because the family depended on him to be the provider. To his face, telling him that he's proud, but behind his back, knowing that Jey is too immature and that he'd have to send a message one way or another. We saw the history of the Anoa'i family, the sum of things being that Roman was destined to be a god, while Jey was right where he should have been, a tag team wrestler and nowhere near the tribal chief status. This capped off by telling fans that the upcoming match would be fought with honor and pride. It was not. I've already done a video talking about Jey's entire arc, so we're not going to go through everything beat by beat. The whole basis of this was essentially spinning Jey against himself, showing that his will to fight for his dreams was no match for the mental manipulation of Roman, taking that same fighting spirit and lending it into the champion's favor, brainwashing him, using his own family, attitude, will, and respect against him. Roman, now without the vest, dominated the match, but Uso continued to hang in there, with the champion eventually sinking as low as he needed to. He demanded to be acknowledged as the head of the table, but the man on the other side was too prideful and wouldn't say it. Jimmy came out to throw in the towel, unable to see his twin in pain, and that's how we go off air. This right here was the birth of Acknowledge Me. I remember watching this and thinking that it's been a long time since I've seen something as compelling as this. There was an uneasiness to the match at points, and by hitting on a story that was unrelated but related to the championship, it propped up how much that title meant. One thing about Roman during this run was he was a tactical heel. He wasn't just evil for the sake of evil. His every move was meticulously plotted out. Look no further than the SmackDown after Clash of Champions. Knowing full well that Jey was far too prideful to let things be, he pushed a match onto him with far greater consequences. An I Quit Hell in a Cell match. Seeing that he could devise a sinister plan to embarrass him in dominant fashion. And that's one of the best parts of this early run, is all those little breadcrumbs that both of them left behind. In this Jey arc, Roman told him that he loved him more than his own brother, psychologically draining the minutes younger twin. It's here where the melodrama and theatrics engage the viewer. You could see the true intentions on both sides. Jey, a character fueled by always being left behind, wanting to finally prove that he could get to the top. Roman, someone who wanted to rule through Machiavellianism. But hey, this is a title reign video, not a deep lore of the bloodline video. Before that, we move into title defense number 2 against Braun Strowman on the season premiere of SmackDown. This match isn't anything to actively seek out, it's really whatever, but it builds up Roman as a bad dude. It also continues the ongoing thread of him becoming more violent to the pushback as the weeks go along. He told his cousin, if I can do this to him, just imagine what I'll do to you. The gaslighting heading into the match continued, with Reigns underlining that if Jey quits, he falls in line. If he doesn't, both twins and their wives are out of the family. This was the opening match at that year's Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, and a lot of the match is slow and methodical. Roman lapping Jay and Uso absorbing the punishment. A gripping story is told on this night, with dialogue and hesitation, bookended by Roman's superficial tears when Jimmy comes out to protect his brother from getting steps dropped onto his head, and using everyone's real names to get Roman to remember that they were family, telling him that whatever he was going through, they could fix it. This happens, Jimmy and Roman embrace, and Roman uses the only person who Jay would quit for to his advantage. This match right here is one of the best pieces of storytelling ever produced by WWE. Following the match, Roman was officially anointed tribal chief with the elders placing a lei around his neck. This asserted his rule, and it also meant anything he said goes. The Jay chapter continued for a little bit with him crying and telling Roman that he hates him before pledging his allegiance and falling in line because he had no other choice. The next little bit was him getting whipped into shape, not being allowed to do interviews without permission, accepting multiple matches for him, looking for Reigns' validation by helping him win an awesome champion versus champion match at Survivor Series. The next rivalry for Roman was against Kevin Owens. He had made a little joke that Roman had Jay fetching his coffee, going on to add that he was being manipulated by someone who said his family was more important than anything, but also treated that same family like trash. Uso then resorted to underhanded tactics to try to appease his boss. This led to Owens challenging Roman to a match at TLC, and I think this trilogy is genuinely fantastic. The early saga gets so much praise, and rightfully so, for its storytelling, but people forget that every match that Owens and Reigns had between 2020 and 2021 has tremendous replay value. The basis of this rivalry was KO absorbing any and all punishment sent his way, proclaiming himself to be the family man that Roman said he was, and come TLC, their chemistry was unreal. Owens came out on fire off the hop and dominated Roman from the onset, with Reigns turning the tide, using any weapons he could get his hands on, all while KO had to fend off multiple Jey Uso run-ins. As far as title defenses go, 3 for 3, no misses in this reign yet. They ran it back a few days later on the Christmas episode of SmackDown Steel Cage Style, and once again with help, Reigns retained. But the best was saved for last, however. After Owens got chucked off a platform and essentially finished off, a gauntlet match was set up to determine a new #1 contender at the Royal Rumble. Reigns was annoyed that Adam Pearce made the decision without his approval, saying that it was his fault that Owens was now injured. But the boys had a plan for later on in the night. Heyman pulled some strings and Pearce was now in the match, and Jay and Roman ensured that the SmackDown GM won. So we were set for the Rumble, Roman versus the Authority, just like the old days. The following week, Paul Heyman is trying to make things as challenging as possible by continually changing the stipulation. I didn't even realize it at the time, but it's a nice little callback to the first SmackDown with Roman as a heel, only this time it was Heyman collecting signatures. Apparently standard WWE contracts all say the same thing, and since Pearce had a little injury in his knee, he could find a suitable replacement, which, as you all know, ended up being the prize fighter. So last man standing at the Rumble, and these matches follow a much different pattern than we got used to later on in this reign. But the one thing that never changes is Kevin Owens coming into a match with a death wish. He goes off here, then into a golf cart, then a swanton off a forklift. The funniest part of this is when Reigns is handcuffed to the lighting rig, Heyman can't unhook the cuffs, and the ref gets to 5, and then just stops counting for a solid 10 seconds. Owens gets choked out, and the head of the table continues to reign in yet another fantastic matchup. Seriously guys, this is easily the most underappreciated work of this entire title reign. All 3 of these matches are a blast, and the character work and continued thread of family on both sides is awesome. Now we set sail towards the home of the Buccaneers, Tampa, Florida for WrestleMania 37. Reigns this year beefed the entire roster. No matter who, no matter if it was a group, a legend, big guy, small guy, this was his 07 Cena year. After the Rumble, he gave Edge the ultimatum that he wanted to be acknowledged as the main event of WrestleMania, but Edge didn't make a decision just yet. He lived true to his nickname, and he was going to wait for the dust to settle at the next pay-per-view and then make a pick. The following week, a chamber match was announced for the Universal Championship, but Heyman was able to help his boy out of hot water and make it an elimination chamber match for an opportunity at the title, with a match for that championship happening right after. In this reign, you had TLC matches, last man standing matches, bloodline rules matches, but Reigns defending in an elimination chamber match surprisingly never happened. Bryan won the chamber, then got destroyed in under 2 minutes by Roman, even though for a brief second he had a glimmer of hope. So as of now, rankings wise, this is easily the worst defense in terms of quality, but this was a bridge to something bigger. A bridge to the WrestleMania main event, which for a short period of time was one-on-one against Edge. Bryan didn't think this was fair and wanted a rematch at Fastlane, which he earned after beating Jey Uso in a steel cage match, all while tensions continued to rise between him and Edge. Bryan made it clear that he could change the Mania main event, and this may be his last shot ever at it, and he needed to do everything in his power to make that dream a reality. All while the Rated R superstar was annoyed that he went 1-30 and had his one-on-one opportunity taken away from him. What was Reigns doing in all of this? Well, he would come out every week and belittle anyone in front of him. In this case, he told Bryan that he loved the business, but he didn't need it, continuing to prop himself up as the top guy, saying that everyone needed him and that he'd rather die in the ring than tap out to someone like him. The story going into the pay-per-view was Edge wanted to prevent any funny business from happening, so by beating Jey, he became the special enforcer, while Bryan claimed he'd make Roman tap for the first time in his career. Speaking of first time evers, in 2015, it was these two who main evented the inaugural Fastlane. If you remember, that was a great match. A few years later, and well, not much had changed. Again, this didn't start off with 6 minutes and 43 seconds of taunting. They went right at it, and match-wise, similar to the three Owens ones, this won't get its respect. It doesn't have the big stakes scene later on. There's no crazy spots, but you did get the classic ref bump. Edge came in, made the count, and eventually with everyone out, Bryan catches a spear into a submission, Reigns taps in the slightest, ref doesn't see it, Edge gets laid out, Roman barely survives, and our setup to WrestleMania was now complete. I'm not going to be one of these guys who pretends that this is the match I wanted just because it ended up being a classic. I wasn't a fan when this got made a triple threat. To me, Bryan felt shoehorned into what should have been a one-on-one dream match, but I was wrong. I also remember thinking that this was Edge's time, just because it made way too much sense. Night 2 was to the day the 10-year anniversary of when he was forced to retire, and what a story you had going into this. All of them had faced some sort of personal hardship to get back to this point, and reaching that mountaintop, holding that Universal Championship felt like the most important thing ever. That title felt like the #1 prize in the company. The question now was whose destiny would prevail. Reigns, for the final time in front of a crowd, came out to the Shield music. 3 men in that group, 3 men in this match. If you look at the 4-year spread of WrestleMania main events Roman had to close out the show, 37, classic. 38, absolute dud. 39, classic. And 40, also a classic. Going 3-1 is pretty damn good, and this match was just so chaotic, and that's what made it so fun. Every moment something was happening, and they sucked you into things with how much all of them said that title meant. Anybody could have realistically won, even though Roman and Edge were the two likeliest. When all was said and done, there was only one. Reigns pinned both challengers at the same time to retain in the most dominant fashion imaginable. The next person that lined up for a shot was Cesaro at WrestleMania Backlash. What a terrible name for a pay-per-view. It was nice to see a different contender rather than the same field headlining a show. However, Reigns was extremely confident in his abilities and was dismissive towards his future challenger, caring way more about ending Daniel Bryan's SmackDown career. His little proposition was that he gives him a Universal title shot. Bryan wins, he's champion, but if he loses, he's banished from the show. The following week, Reigns debuted the Head of the Table theme song, and at that moment, you knew it was over for DB. Wrestling-wise, if you want to go into the comment section and argue this is the best pure wrestling match of this reign, I'm willing to listen. This was a pay-per-view worthy clinic given away on free TV. Since Bryan's contract was about to expire, it also effectively wrote him off. After the match, out comes Cesaro to save his buddy, but the 2-on-1 is too much. He's forced to watch his friend take a concerto for his troubles. It was also around this time where we got the return of the other twin. Jimmy Uso had been out injured. He came back and he was asking Jay what was wrong with him and when did he become such a bitch. During that segment, he was interrupted by Cesaro, and a match between him and Seth Rollins was made, with the former earning a match at the next pay-per-view. They also started to tease a potential matchup between the latter and Reigns. More like the chair and Reigns. Am I right? Am I right? No. At WrestleMania Backlash, the two had a hard-hitting match reaffirming that the guy had his working boots on in 2021. I think this needed a little bit of time shaved off, certain portions of it drag on, but it's a good matchup between two powerhouses. Plus, Cesaro didn't look weak in defeat as Roman choked him out. Rollins came out, squared up, but again, it wouldn't be just yet. The tensions between Roman, Jay, and Jimmy continued, and here, Roman manipulated again to do to Jimmy what he'd already done to his twin brother. With Jay already brainwashed and listening to his every command, Roman, seeing that he might listen to his older brother, tried to spin them against one another, calling Jimmy Jay because it wouldn't matter which twin is which again. In this, the Usos get a tag team title match against the Mysterios, which they don't end up winning, leading to Roman interjecting. After Reigns drops Dominic, a brief Rey Mysterio feud kicks off. So Jay's loyalty is at a crossroads, and this Mysterio chapter is more so a setup to get the tag team championships off of those two and onto the Usos. For some reason, I guess Reigns didn't want to work the Hell in a Cell show, so 2 days before the actual event, these two compete in that match type. Comparatively speaking, it's a weaker title defense, but it's still fine. I really want you to keep this Jimmy Jay saga in mind because it's Jimmy who sees that his twin brother is being used by Roman, and later on in this story there's parts that don't align with the original ideology he had here. SummerSlam 2023, I'm looking at you. Edge returned after being murdered at WrestleMania 37. He'd been out selling the concerto he took and was now back to claim what was rightfully his. This one coming at Money in the Bank, another top tier match, a dream match come to life. Plus the added weight of this being the return to pay-per-view with fans. Again, I feel like it's just a little bit long, but nonetheless great. Edge lost because of Seth Rollins' interference, who was upset that he didn't win the Money in the Bank, and more so that he didn't get a championship match against Reigns. This led us to the Rollins and Edge trilogy, which is personally my favorite WWE feud of the past 10 years. But to end the show, the GOAT was back. John Cena returned, and it was time for the face-off between generations. That era's top guy versus this era's top guy. Now, I have a bit of a beef with how this story goes. This is a year in which Roman is wiping the floor with everyone in front of him. He's the one challenging people to prove his dominance, but when Cena's like, I want a match, Reigns is like, no, I'm not doing that, and instead accepts Finn Balor's challenge. They then backtracked and had Cena sign a contract that was supposed to be signed by Finn, so that story was put on the back burner. But I don't think this needed to be that complicated. He's narcissistic, he's got protection, he's literally sending people packing. Why is he afraid of John Cena? The other way they made this less exciting was on the night before SummerSlam SmackDown. Roman said he'd leave WWE if he lost, so you knew that wasn't gonna happen. You knew not even in the slightest, being on the run that he was on, was he going to exit the company. Part of things is your suspension of disbelief that anyone can win, and they frame this as John Cena is back from his movies, but he might win his 17th world title at SummerSlam, we'll see. Also, Cena looks a little goofy in this because he's like, wow, Roman, you really suck. You have to keep changing your character because nothing you do ever sticks, even though the current iteration of the character was finally sticking. Nitpicking for sure, but it stood out to me. Match-wise, it's alright. Cena had to work that conservative style because of his shooting schedule, and I guess the 1-2-3 thing made sense since Cena wasn't going to do anything flashy. The story of the match was that Cena could end it and become a historic 17-time world champion within the blink of an eye. Roman ended up kicking out of a normal AA, an AA into the AA announce table, and then a second rope AA, while Cena lost to just one spear. That's all it took. The result was never in question, and seconds after Reigns won, Brock Lesnar returned. Now we geared up for the Paul Heyman Bowl. Reigns beat Balor a few weeks after SummerSlam on SmackDown. Build-wise, this wasn't anything dazzling. You had a refreshed Finn coming back after doing some great work in the dying days of the Black and Gold NXT. Once he beat him, the red lights went off, and we knew within a matter of time it would be Demon Time. That was going to happen at Extreme Rules, while the other match being built up against Lesnar would take place a month afterwards at Crown Jewel. Anything goes for this. There's a nice little callback with Finn using a low blow kick out following a spear. After a coup de grace, the Usos save Roman. All hell proceeds to break loose. Then, suddenly, this red light takes over the arena and Finn starts throbbing, pulsating, flopping like a fish, and this red light, I guess, has awoken the demon. His theme song is playing in the back, and this is giving him some sort of mystical, magical, god-defining powers. I don't understand what in the 2K story creator cutscene this was. You're led to believe that Finn's about to win. He goes to the top rope, which perfectly collapses to the minute second that the red lighting stops. Spear, 1, 2, 3, that's it. Good match, goofy ending. That was it for Finn. We never found out why the rope snapped, who was behind it. Why was Balor pulsating like that, even though it never happened before or after? But we were told that God ended up intervening in this matchup. After this, we had a 1-month build to Crown Jewel with the themes already mentioned. Is Heyman with Brock? Is Heyman not with Brock? What's he going to do? Is he going to screw over Roman? The Crown Jewel match I thought was solid. This topped off the best Saudi Arabia pay-per-view to date. It had you questioning where Heyman's allegiance truly lied, but we never got a definitive answer. He threw the title in the middle of the ring and said you know what to do with it without us knowing who it was intended for. Reigns blasted Brock with the title and retained after some Usos interference. Following this, Lesnar was suspended in storyline. Meanwhile, Roman beat up King Woods for a little bit since it was going to be Big E and him at Survivor Series champion versus champion, which he again won. Beat Sami Zayn in seconds, who had won a battle royal to become the #1 contender on the same night that Lesnar's suspension was lifted. You could tell that they were adamant about stretching Lesnar and Reigns for another match or two because Roman had fired Heyman after he told him that he was protecting him from Lesnar. The big storyline element was Heyman was contemplating retirement after being fired. Match number 88 between these two was supposed to take place on the first ever day 1. We were told that Roman contracted COVID-19. The main event was off the table. Brock Lesnar instead went on to win the WWE Championship, leaving things a far bigger mess. Since they were hell-bent on this match happening, it introduced another championship into the picture. A title that for a period of time was removed from said picture and then forcefully brought back in. Months and months before WrestleMania, another Brock-Roman match was penciled in as the main event, but how we were going to get there was still unclear. 504 days was the record held by Reigns' rival, and he broke that a few weeks into 2022. Speculation suggests that day 1 was supposed to be a reset. Both titles were supposed to switch hands, with the Universal also involving a subsequent angle that would set up the final match between these two, while the WWE title was won by Seth Rollins. Galaxy brain that however you want, but at the end of the day, seeing both guys with the title on their shoulders seemed to be something that management just couldn't resist. Days after the event, Roman was on SmackDown teasing another match with the Beast, while Paul Heyman was back with Brock flip-flopping more than Prime Big Show. It was on this episode where Seth Rollins was named the next challenger to Roman, this after he knocked on his door to the tune of the Shield's theme song. The build took the direction of deep psychological trauma and insecurities a decade on from the group's arrival to WWE. Roman told Seth that he'll never forgive him for what he did, adding that he hates him and that the Shield was a thing of the past for him. At the Rumble, the Architect laid out the perfect plan to rattle his opponent from the onset, making the memories of days gone by flood back and effectively using theme music and ring attire to play mental chess against Roman. With this opening up the show and the Brock match very much still a possibility, there was the thought that maybe, just maybe, Roman could lose here, go on to win the Rumble to conclude the show, and everything would come to a close for the WWE title. Well, Reigns technically did lose, but it was by DQ. When the power advantage became too much for Seth, he teased him with the Shield fist, completely setting Roman off, beating him into a pulp, locking in a guillotine, with the ref begging for him to let go of Seth. His answer? He won't allow me to let go. Seemingly also getting closure by taking that same steel chair to Rollins' back. But as you guys know, no matter how hard you try, sometimes you just never get that closure. Later, Lesnar took on Bobby Lashley with the WWE title up for grabs, and more backpedaling took place. Reigns interfered, struck the Beast in the face with the title that was handed to him by Paul Heyman. Brock loses that championship. Heyman is back with Roman just like that. Brock wins the Rumble. The night after, he's announced as a participant for the Elimination Chamber WWE title match, and also selects the Universal title as the championship he wants to go for after winning the Rumble. Reigns had a stopgap defense against Goldberg at Elimination Chamber. Clear precedence for this, since this was supposed to come to us before Roman took his leave. Lock up, little brawl on the outside. Goldberg spear, Roman rock bottom, Roman Superman punch, Goldberg spear, failed jackhammer, guillotine. Reigns wins, Goldberg passes out. That is literally the entire match. Brock wins the chamber to cap things off, and we were headed towards what was labeled the biggest WrestleMania match of all time, and what I thought was finally gonna be the finale. After all, this was the hat trick in these guys' WrestleMania story. It's so strange to see the dynamic of how WWE saw this versus how the fans saw this rivalry. I understand why they did it. There's mass appeal having two horses like these two go at it. Their social media views and online metrics support that. But the hardcores were just so over this. This was their 6th one-on-one meeting, and they treated this as some all-time grail rivalry. But this was just a finisher spam. They put on a dud. Roman now had both world championships once WrestleMania came to a close. You guys know very, very well, when you unify titles, it never goes well. Never. One show always ends up suffering, and within a matter of time, they have to hit the undo button. Post-WrestleMania, they really started to prop up the numbers, and it became an obsession over chasing those numbers. Raw took a major blow, and once Cody went down with injury in the summer of 22, it was rough sledding on Mondays. Plus, Roman had negotiated a new contract that had fewer dates on it. I'll let Seth Rollins take things over for a little bit.
After WrestleMania 30, whatever it was, I don't remember anymore.
What city was it?
Dallas.
38.
Yeah, we were in such a garbage place when they unified the titles. It was like there was such a low ceiling for everybody. We didn't have the two titles. We didn't have a way out of getting the titles separated. It was like we could not get that done. We were just, there were so many, every suggestion just had a wall in front of it. It just couldn't get done. It was hurting the rest of the roster to not have anything to go for.
That wall that he's talking about is Roman having both championships. How do you end the most dominant reign in forever anywhere but WrestleMania? How do you take one championship off a guy that's dominating the entire roster? I'm not saying that they should have booked Roman to start handing out title defenses like candy on Halloween. There's a brilliance to being an attraction wrestler because your stories have that much more weight when you show up. I just wish that 2021 consistency was kept up, especially in 2023. I actually think from SummerSlam to when he lost it at WrestleMania 40 was really bad. Very pedestrian, coasting on by with no relevant opponents, locked into the exact same uncreative finish every single time with the same match structure. The shows were so much better when they centered around Roman and what he was doing on the night. This, however, was not the final days of his championship run, though. WWE still had a ton of magic up their sleeve. Following a defense against Matt Riddle, the final encounter between Lesnar and Reigns was set up. SummerSlam, last man standing, and hopefully last time ever. This match right here is up there with some of the best main events ever. I think it's an absolute classic. The brutality, the memorable tractor ring lift, the vibes of Nissan Stadium. This thing was a masterpiece. Another notch into the spectacular category for this run. Shortly thereafter came another entry onto that list. Next up came Clash at the Castle 2022 against Drew McIntyre. McIntyre was built up as a more than formidable challenger, a challenger that should they have chosen to end things here, I don't think many people would have been upset. This story had been revisited a couple times. Roman and Drew had fought at Survivor Series, and then in a tag match at WrestleMania Backlash, which is still a terrible name for a pay-per-view. After winning a number one contenders match, the story was all about the moment. Drew had been chasing his moment. When it should have came to him, There was no one there, no blaze of pyro, no one to share it with, so the possibility was very much there. This show felt like a mini WrestleMania, a molten hot crowd ready for Drew to do it, so many near falls, the ultimate stage for a title switch to happen. Shocking to say that it was a first time ever pay-per-view, and that's how hype it was. There was something special in the air on this night. But what's a bad guy supposed to do? He crushed the dreams of thousands in attendance and millions worldwide. Solo Sikoa came to the rescue, and this left everyone heartbroken. He'd given you hope, and then at the last moment, taking it all away just like that. 2022 title reign wise, what do we have? A psychological Rumble showdown with Seth Rollins, a pretty nothing match against Goldberg, a title for title dud against Lesnar, a solid TV match against Matt Riddle, an all-time classic last man standing match at SummerSlam, a spectacle villain versus hero clash at the Castle, and to end the year, just a casual banger with Logan Paul. This came together after an appearance on his podcast. If you notice, the storytelling has been on pause for a bit. They didn't really pick up the Bloodline saga until 2023. It feels like in 2021, they just left it on the back burner. But this was a year that was filled with all of their melodrama and then some. They really honed in on that storytelling aspect in this year because to start 2023, we got the blueprint for what was going to take place the entire year. At the end of 2022, Reigns was involved in the War Games match that featured the Bloodline, which now had Sami Zayn in it. They took on Drew McIntyre, Sheamus, Ridge Holland, Butch, and Kevin Owens, who got hit with a low blow by his best friend, fully trying to prove his allegiance to the leader and the gatekeeper of the Bloodline. On the surface, Sami was just comedic relief. What was he doing in a story that was steeped in tradition and family? He felt like an intruder in this, out of place, on some sort of side quest. But what everyone didn't know was that the Honorary Uce saga would literally save this story, and within a matter of months, he'd become the hottest act in the entire company. It appeared as though someone who was lost had finally found a family. On Kevin's side, it was this constant cry that Sami was being used by Roman, also not forgetting what he had done to him in the earliest days of this run back in 2020. After Sami ate a pin in a tag match, Roman didn't take too kindly to that, and he started to question what Sami was up to. He'd been nothing but loyal, but we were told he'd have one final test, and that would come at the Rumble. The match is just a device to get to one of the most iconic WWE segments. In the overall space of things, it's weak and a match for the sake of a match, but what came next was top tier. After Reigns retained, the Bloodline laid into Owens, handcuffing him to the ring ropes, and then Sami was given his final command: prove that Owens truly meant nothing to him. Once and for all, put all the doubt to rest. He didn't and couldn't. Instead, Reigns got struck in the back with a chair, and the decibel meter of this crowd reaction tells you everything you need to know. This one segment set up Sami's exit from the Bloodline, Jay and Sami's complex friendship, Roman's continued steel chair trauma, and Jay's choice between family and friendship. While watching this, my dumbass thought that The Rock was going to come out and help Sami. There was speculation that Rock versus Roman would finally happen and it would take place in LA, and apparently it almost did.
About in the beginning of 2022, Nick Khan, who we know,
Friend of ours, shout out
very
Nick.
good friend, long time, for years.
Dog.
He's the man. He was very instrumental in bringing Vince and I together. We all flew to LA. We met, we sat. This is the beginning in 2022. And we broke out the Terramana. We toasted life, toasted the business we love. And about an hour later, we started talking about the potential of what this match could be between myself and Roman Reigns headlining WrestleMania at SoFi. And we shook hands and we hugged right there, all three of us at the table, and said, let's do this. And so the North Star, though, so then we had a year to really think about this. So the North Star thought was, okay, let's not do something good, let's not do something great, let's do something unprecedented. And it was in what can we create for the fans that has never been done before. A match, great, amazing. We can have the match, but the bigger thought was, what can we do for the fans in this business that we love that will, where WrestleMania isn't the end of something, it's actually the beginning of something bigger.
Got it.
So
So what happened?
So we got really, really close, but we couldn't actually nail what that thing was.
As you guys know, WrestleMania 39 was instead Cody and Roman. At the Rumble, Rhodes made his return from a torn pectoral to win the match, and our end destination was clear. Or was it? Before we could think of that came Elimination Chamber in Sami Zayn's hometown of Montreal. I think as time goes on, it may be forgotten that there was a heavy push from a portion of the audience for Zayn to be the one that ended things after he stood up for himself. There were so many gymnastics being done at this time. What if Sami just wins one title and Roman keeps the other? What I'm about to say is the most sink in the kitchen type comment, but I feel as though people who were in or around the Bloodline story for a substantial amount of time, by rubbing shoulders with Roman, were elevated. It wasn't one of these cases where they have a world title match and then they just fall down the pecking order, because as you still see today, everything comes back to the Bloodline. The title reign was part of a larger overarching story that had so many different facets, and everything went back to the Bloodline. Whether they beat someone up, whether they screwed someone over, whether they mentally manipulated someone, it has so many different branches in where the story goes. So by virtue of getting that exposure with top guys and then that momentum not immediately being squashed in some occurrences, that really helped build other guys. In this case, it was Owens and Zayn. The build for the Chamber was only a couple weeks, with Roman telling Sami that he was going to embarrass him in front of his whole province, family, and friends. This night was, again, electric. For fans in this era, I feel like once they grow up, a lot of them will equate this to how I do with Cena and RVD at One Night Stand. The crowd going ballistic for one guy, and then with a fiery passion despising the other, continuing to kill another dream, all while slowly advancing storyline elements. This Montreal versus Roman sign tells you everything you need to know. F you Roman chants left and right. Tension, stakes, near falls, melodrama with Jay, a crowd that was so hungry to see the underdog prevail, bullying Sami's wife, these poor referees taking bumps every single match. I'm surprised they didn't run the Triple H storyline where no one wants to officiate his matches. These guys, every single match took so much abuse. I don't know how they didn't form some sort of union. Anyways, as a fan, you live for these types of nights where you can immerse yourself in a story like this. This was just such a special night. Now it was on. The battle of two of wrestling's royal families. Reigns, Rhodes, everything on the line. It was the guy who was holding things down for the company against the man that fans wanted to see as the next one up. Cody on his pursuit to finish the story and win the WWE Championship, get to the mountaintop, and what better way to do it than against the face of the franchise who wanted to continue to prove that he was the dynasty and he wasn't ready to give up the kingdom just yet. By the time we got to LA, Reigns was so close to the 1,000 day plateau, so you had that possibility. There was that 50-50 split on who would cap off the show as world champion. Very few times do you get a face-off between 1-2 punches like this, and everything aligns perfectly. They have a great story, fantastic in-ring chemistry, and the winner is up in the air. On one road, it was history. On the other path, it was the perfect guy to end what at this point was already one of the most dominant reigns in company history. The match is another one that defines this 1,300-day run. Everything about it is amazing. The entrances, the ring introductions, the location, how both guys were in lockstep on that ring canvas. This, in my book, is a 5-star classic that again at the end left a certain portion of the audience heartbroken as Roman was booked to take the win once again. I was one of these people who thought it was pretty obvious that Cody should have won because it felt like the right decision. In hindsight, I didn't know that Rhodes' popularity would be at an atmospheric level the next year. For some fans, this felt like a short-sighted decision where WWE was hunting history rather than making the easy and obvious choice. At this point, you knew that Roman wasn't losing for at least another year, and also, how was WWE going to capture lightning in a bottle all over again? To play devil's advocate, the counter argument was that this was Cody's 4th pay-per-view match. How does someone who's been on the shelf recovering just beat God himself? One night before this, the Usos lost the tag team championships to Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. With that happening, tension started to mount between those within the bloodline. The twins were bullied by Roman, slowly grew a set and turned on him. This after they became the longest reigning tag team champions of all time. What made Roman so special as a character was the manipulation, what he was as a character. I'll go on record to say that a top guy in WWE has never had this level of depth and told a story like he was at any point. And I also want you to remember, it was Jimmy who turned first, with Jay eventually knowing what side he stood on. The Summer of the Bloodline was huge. I enjoyed the segments, the monstrous pops they got wherever they went. At Money in the Bank during the Bloodline Civil War main event, Roman Reigns was pinned for the first time in 4 years. The man to do it? Jey Uso. Realistically, another guy who story-wise could have won the title. Starting and ending with the same man made a lot of sense. It was on at SummerSlam. Tribal Combat, Roman's title, and his Ula Fala up for grabs. Then there's the match, which is a slog to sit through. Far too long, not enough action in the nearly 40 minutes it went on for. I really think it was a major letdown. There's people who try to be contrarians just for the sake of things. I thought that maybe the first time I watched this in Detroit, maybe it just didn't hit, maybe I was tired. I watched it again, and I tried to like it. Now I've seen this thing for a total of 4 times, and I can't in good faith give this match any benefit of the doubt anywhere. The pacing is off, the match is bland, there's interference even though we were told that there would be no interference from anyone in the family. Add to that the ending felt like the Bloodline story had officially jumped the shark. On your screen is the very definition of jumping the shark. Remember earlier when I told you that Jimmy was extremely reluctant to join Roman? Well, here he cost his own twin brother the match, when he was the guy who was telling Jay in 2021 that he was better than Roman. Plus, he was the guy who rattled Reigns' cage first by kicking him in Saudi Arabia. This doesn't age well at all. The reason they justified for this was that Jimmy didn't want his brother to become power hungry like Roman while still being aligned with Roman the whole way through. It would have made way more sense if he ditched the group altogether. After this, Roman's appearances were again staggered, with his final title defense of 2023 coming 3 months after SummerSlam at Crown Jewel. This one was against LA Knight. He said that in the time that Reigns was gone for, he took off in popularity, which was true. The match was fine, but again, the result was never in question, just like at the Royal Rumble. This one, a fatal 4-way. Roman and the Bloodline had made way too many enemies. You had a returning Randy Orton, AJ Styles, and LA Knight. Good match, could have been a lot better. For the second straight year, Cody Rhodes won the Royal Rumble and pointed at Roman Reigns, so it looked like a year of running back the Cena downfall storyline was all going to culminate with Cody taking away the title from Roman. A few weeks before this was the Day 1 Raw, where the Great One returned and just as he was finishing up, asked if he should sit at the head of the table. So Cody won the Rumble, pointed at Roman, and then on the following SmackDown confronted the greatest champion of the modern era and told him that he's coming for the title, but not at WrestleMania, giving up his shot at redemption for The Rock, and this blew up online. A large portion of the audience felt like Rhodes was being shunned aside for another Bloodline match, meaning 2 things. 1, it would be for the title, and 2, the result would be Roman holding the championship for at the very least another year. While the guy who was making the towns, putting in the work, would have to wait a lot longer if that even happened at all. The hashtag #WeWantCody took off, fans mass disliked the video on YouTube, and it was a mess for WWE. The brilliant part about messes is they can be cleaned up. WWE pivoted and used the 2-night WrestleMania format very effectively. This story really kicking off at the WrestleMania kickoff. Roman and Rock wanted to pay tribute to their heritage and have their match. Instead of taking the animosity angle, they spun this as a power trip between 2 of the company's elite, all while Cody Rhodes was left at a crossroads. While the decision was being made, Seth Rollins made an enemy out of The Rock as well, so after Cody didn't choose the World Heavyweight Championship at the press event and insulted Roman's family, also directly insulting The Rock's family, we had much more conflict. Rollins told his former enemy that he was uniquely suited to be his Shield at WrestleMania, and you started to ask yourself, what does that mean? After all, rewind to 2 years before this, and the hatred that these two shared for one another. The Rock in all of this went from the Great One to the final boss. There are not enough words in the English vocabulary to describe how awe-inspiring this character reinvention was. Rock went back to his old ways of ripping into the crowd, having zero Fs to give, and calling everyone who ruined the dream match Cody crybabies, exercising his political power as a recently joined TKO board member, having also come into conflict with Triple H at the WrestleMania XL kickoff event. WWE tried to make this feel as authentic as possible, and I feel like they really achieved that goal. This build up to WrestleMania was magic. Remember earlier I was like, how do you capture lightning in a bottle twice? Well, they seemed to do it better a second time than they did the first. Rock and Cody had such a fantastic dynamic between the two that at points Roman felt like he was getting little brothered and these two were the main event. I can't exactly tell you what the original plans were, if I'm being honest. There's way too many contradicting reports out there about what the initial plan was, what Cody was told, what Rock wanted, what Roman wanted, so we're just gonna look at the storyline mainly. You had The Rock return back to his $500 shirt era, join the Bloodline, and even acknowledge Roman as the head of the table. Plus, Rock, while raising his finger in unison with the rest of the Bloodline, transitioned it into an L. Also making you wonder, is this whole thing some masterstroke to screw over Roman? Cody challenged Rock to a one-on-one match, with Rock rejecting and countering with a tag match. Him and Roman against Michelle's baby boy and the World Heavyweight Champion. And a nice touch in this is, since throughout the reign there were so many interference finishes and Roman had a whole group behind him, they made the stipulation that if Cody's team wins, then the Night 2 match will have no interference from anyone in their group, but should The Rock's team win, it'll be Bloodline rules. Later, Cody was told that if he doesn't win, then that's it. He'll never get another shot at the Undisputed Championship. And for good measure, how about introducing Rhodes' mom into the picture, giving us a Rock concert, and then leaving the American Nightmare a bloody pulp? On the Raw before the big show, Seth Rollins said that he always has a plan B. Take into account the World Heavyweight Championship work rate run was, in spite of what Roman was doing, a championship created because of his dominance and the visionary wanting to be everything that his former Shield brother wasn't. After all, think back to Royal Rumble 2022. Seth Rollins was someone Roman had a tough time overcoming, but there's the old adage that some people never change, they just find new ways to lie. WWE threw in the curveball by having him mention that there's always a plan B, all while he had a massive threat chasing after his championship in the form of Drew McIntyre, plus a legitimate knee injury. Going into WrestleMania, there were so many questions. Would Seth turn? Would Cody do it? Somehow, even after acknowledging Roman, would The Rock play a factor into this? Who was going to show up during the Night 2 main event? So many questions, and in a matter of days, they were all answered. Lincoln Financial Field, April 6, 2024. Roman Reigns walks into his 4th WrestleMania straight as champion and main events for a record 9th time. Kinda ironic and fitting that the guy who was born the year of the very first edition of this show goes on to hold the record for most main events. Don't tell me long-term storytelling doesn't exist. With 1,315 days of dominance behind him with a title defense to follow the next night no matter what, the question now was it going to be Bloodline rules, or was Cody going to have a fair shot at this? To close out a cold night in Philly, these 4 men took over and created magic. The babyface team did everything in their power to take it home. Seth Rollins didn't turn, but as we all figured, this match was going to end up being Bloodline rules. Cody was pinned by The Rock to make things official, with Michael Cole adding the exclamation point that Rhodes was screwed. We all knew the following night would be a movie, but not in my wildest dreams did I think they'd be able to execute the end of Roman's title reign perfectly. There was already a heavy emotional investment in this, and somehow Cody and Roman managed to replicate, or depending on who you ask, even exceed what they did the previous year. You had the Samoan Mafia boss who had hit a level of excellence that you'll never see again. Then you had the underdog ready to overcome the odds. Both guys' entrances would have blown the roof off the place if it had one. The key story element was Cody hitting the third consecutive crossroads on the side where Solo Sikoa ruined his dream the previous year. Roman and Cody had a match that encapsulated everything that's fun about wrestling. I actually think that because of all the shenanigans, the wrestling bit of this match takes a backseat to all the cameos. They truly have chemistry that's that good. First, Jimmy ran interference and he was picked off by Brother Jay. Then Solo came in and he was neutralized by John Cena, who was confronted by The Rock. So just like planned, the final boss was here to send Cody's story up in smoke. But then the Shield's music hit. I know some people were so immersed in this that they thought this wasn't Seth Rollins, but it was. At that very moment, the King of Jungle Movies was about to attack. Rollins proved true to his point. He took a bullet for Cody, having already gone through hell in a tag match the night before, also losing his World Heavyweight Championship earlier that night. And Seth was the embodiment of lose it all to gain it all. The Undertaker came out to nullify Rock, and once the lights came back up, Roman had a choice. Earlier I said sometimes no matter how hard you try, you never achieve closure. Instead of hanging on to what was most precious to him in a carbon copy of 10 years previous, the Tribal Chief didn't let the wounds heal. And that momentary lapse of judgment allowed Cody to take advantage, hit 3 crossroads, and finish his story. The way this title reign ended was one of the most memorable matches and subsequent moments of all time. And I know a lot of us always put the all-time tag on everything, but this is truly an all-timer. This is everything you live for. How can something like this not bring you goosebumps? The emotional roller coaster you were taken on from literally day one all the way until the end of WrestleMania is some of the most fun I've personally ever had watching this medium. The WWE was very, very lucky that they were able to rekindle the magic and then some that they had the previous year. Eliminate The Rock from the equation, and I don't know if it hits the same at all, but they achieved such a fantastic emotional peak with this whole program. This was truly once in a lifetime, just like the title reign. I don't think you could find a better way to tie a bow on something that iconic. What a run. That's all I can say. What a run. Roman Reigns quite literally has his own 4-year era etched into WWE history. Not many wrestlers were as dominant as he was. A captivating title reign that was crucial in the revival of the company. After some awful years of television, the Tribal Chief character, the Bloodline story, and this title reign was so effective in getting WWE back into fans' good graces. This right here was Roman rewriting his legacy. Redemption for who he was in the grand scheme of WWE. Rewriting everything that went wrong with the Big Dog run. A showcase of his Samoan tradition and a story of family. Again, just like Heyman said on the SmackDown after Payback, those 3 words were the pillars. A man who before this was at an all-time low creatively, was so sick and tired of things that he thought he was done with WWE. Came back and was the key cog in the defining story of his generation, helping both Solo Sikoa and Jey Uso become stars, all while the chaos the Bloodline left behind continued to fuel storylines. And yeah, I understand the criticisms of the final year and the reliance on the same finish, the same match structure. The people who are saying that are completely correct and justified. It was a slog to sit through, but when you really look back at it, there's far more hits than misses. Through this, there were so many big-time storylines and matches against Edge and Bryan at WrestleMania, Brock at SummerSlam, Drew at Clash at the Castle, Cody in 2 all-time clinics, Sami at the Elimination Chamber, the cinematic Jey saga. As we sit here in the 2020s, this run meant so much in relaunching WWE's brand identity. This man legitimately put in the work, truly went God mode, and helped the promotion right the ship by being the attraction that fans paid to see. Doing everything the business is built on, shipping merch, helping WWE pack stadiums, painting new moments for fans to relive, and most importantly, cementing his place in history. Once that head of the table riff hit, the energy shifted, and for 1,316 days, Roman reigned atop WWE.